Hey everyone, just a quick update on the game that I'm working on. It's getting close to completion, and I'm just kind of working on the overall aesthetics that I'm trying to make it look a little bit more distinctive. The core gameplay is in place. This again is just working on the aesthetics. Now, one of the pushes that you'll see in video games is the attempt to try to make games look less like games, that they try to eliminate the UI or try to minimize it. In this case, one of the main things you need to be concerned about is the town's HP, because you're trying to protect the town. So every time a monster gets past you and it hits the town will take damage. Well, typical video game approach, you would have a meter, again, a UI overlay that says town HP, and it either has a number showing the damage or it has like a meter and the meter shrinks, like in fighting games and things like that. But what if you don't want to do that? What if you're trying to get rid of that kind of video gamey appearance, that you're trying to remove the UI as much as possible? What you can do is you can have certain, in this case, particle systems appear to indicate that a certain amount of damage has been reached, that a certain threshold has been reached. So say your town has 100 HP. I have 4 fires to indicate that different thresholds have been breached, like 90, 80, 70, 60, that kind of thing. And as the HP variable decreases, you simply have the fire appear. Now, I'm not going to go into any great detail about how to make the fire look like this. Particle systems are their own tutorial. I'll just call it 3 quick things. One, the way that I made the top frayed like that, like a typical stylized fire, size over lifetime. So I simply, by enabling size over lifetime, and I have it decrease from 1.0 to essentially 0. So the particle starts full size at the bottom when it instantiates and then shrinks as it goes up to the top, making it smaller. 2, in the render section, I do not use the default particle. I created my own, not that one, sorry, it's that one. And what I did, 2 notable things about this. First of all, I don't use the default circle. Instead, I use this kind of S shape. Why? Again, to try to create this stylized look. And this really lets you do something that you can't do with a circle. With a circle, if you rotate it, you don't see the rotation. But because this isn't a circle, if this is rotating, your eye very subtly does pick up on that extra chaos, that extra movement. And so it's one of those subtle things that you can do to try to look a little, kind of capture that chaotic energy of a fire. And the third, I enabled emissions and added an emission color. That's just selecting a color and it's selecting an intensity. I'm not going to go into any more details there. Getting a glow effect is a separate tutorial in and of itself. Okay, so those are the particle systems. Now, what I want to happen is I want the particle systems to not show up until HP has reached a certain level. So let's go to the coding. So every one of these fires, they are placed ahead of time, but we put this script on them. And this is just kind of a catch-all script. As you can see, it's called cleanup. I'm using it for a variety of things. So if we go to a cleanup script, what do we do? Well, in the start section, we don't want the fires to be there. So what do? Right here. I look at the name of the fire, I look at the name of the object that the script is attached to. If it's fire 1, 2, 3, or 4, over here you'll see fire 1, 2, 3, or 4. So if the object the script is attached to has that name, then get the particle system component. So get component particle system enable emission false. So I've just disabled emissions. Now you might be wondering, what's that green line under this? That means that it's been deprecated. But even though it's been deprecated, it still works. So this is kind of a tie-over. Like I've talked often about how when you first create your project, it's about making it easy to code and easy to read, and that later you worry about optimization. Well, in this case, this is technically an old way of doing it, but it's been deprecated for years. I don't know when they're ever going to get rid of it, but this is good placeholder code to get this working. What you ultimately are supposed to do is you're supposed to create a variable for each subcomponent, because a particle system is a component. Well, you're supposed to break it down into the main and the emission and the shape. And so you create these variables for each subcomponent and then you make the change. Didn't feel like doing that. I'll probably eventually. Again, like I said, the first pass is just proof of concept to make something work. So it's just attaching the script to those 4 objects, checking for those objects' names, and then disabling the emission. So watch what happens. And you'll see there's like a camera scroll at the beginning. That's because one of the other things I'm doing is I'm going to have the town being built over time. So at the beginning of the game, the town is not built. And with every passing level, there'll be another building, another foundation to try to give the sense of what you're protecting. So yeah, so it's just going to quickly pan through the town. And then as you can see, the fires are not there. Okay. So that's working. Now we want to do the opposite. Now we said that based on the value of the town HP variable, we want these fires to appear. And it's arbitrary as far as what values you're going to use. So again, these are in the start section because we want this to happen as soon as the scene is instantiated. These, however, will be in the update section because we want this to be checked with each and every frame. And so it's almost identical. Again, checks for the name of the object, fire 3214, but we are also checking for town HP. So obviously town HP is just that. It's the HP of the town and it starts at 100. And the reason why it says game flow is because that's where it's declared. So if we come over here to game flow, you can see town HP is here somewhere, right here. So if the object the script is attached to is fire1 PS and gameflow.townHP is less than 90, now enable that emission. So whereas up here it said enable emission false, here it says enable emission true. And again, you've got the squiggly line because it's deprecated, but even though it's deprecated, it still works. There are other tutorials that show you how to break down into the subcomponents. Again, it's the last thing that I'm worried about. I'm just looking at about proof of concept and seeing if I like the way that it works before I get into the really minute optimized code. So if it's less than 90, then fire1 PS gets enabled. If it's less than 70, then fire 2 is also enabled because these are not mutually exclusive. 70 is less than 90, so these will both be enabled. If it's less than 50, then this one is enabled. So again, they're not mutually exclusive, and then this one's less than 30. So the first thing that I would mention if you are concerned about optimization, this is happening way more times than it needs to, because once this gets enabled, you shouldn't ever have to check this again because this has technically happened, as I said, with each and every frame. So I would probably put something in that detects that this has been enabled, and then it would check for that too. So GameObject.name equals fire1 PS, and the town HP is less than 90, and it has yet to be enabled, so that would just be a variable that you would change. And if it hasn't been enabled, then it gets enabled, but then you change that variable here. So you'd add another line, and whatever the name of that variable is, you'd say is enabled equals yes. And that would be what you would check up here. That way you don't keep unnecessarily running this. So if you're worried about optimization, that's one thing that you need to be mindful of, is that this keeps executing even after it's been enabled. It's going to keep trying to re-enable it. So that's about it for the coding. Let's just watch it run, and there should not be any problems with it. So what happens is when the enemies get past you, they like hop over the wall. I'm still not certain I like the way that looks. And just for debugging, I do have the town HP listed up here. So it's not less than 90 yet. There we go. That fire gets enabled. That fire gets enabled. That's a guy who shuts off the lights. I'll do a tutorial about that. That fire gets enabled. And then that fire gets enabled. So you could hide this meter and still people would have a general idea of how much damage is being done. Again, it lacks precision because it is basically knowing that certain thresholds have been reached, but the next fire doesn't turn on into another threshold. So rather than knowing an exact value, you know a general value. And in the options menu, I actually give the ability to shut that off as well. So that is the town HP, because like I said, that's really there for debug purposes, but I try to give people choices. If they want to see a town HP meter, they can, and it's there. So I think that's about it for this video. I just wanted to cover this idea of how you can provide information to the player without taking the typical video game approach of meters and numbers, and that you can instead visually represent what's going on. And again, this isn't like an original idea. I've seen games where like if you're driving a car and the car is getting damaged, it starts to smoke and things like that. So I think that's about it. So hopefully I'll be able to release this game in another few weeks. We'll see. It's like I said, it's really just finishing up the visual appearance. Like I'm not certain I really like the way that these trees look, and the grass texture is actually a carpet. So probably don't want a carpet for the grass. So I'm trying to decide exactly how I want to go about that. So like I said, the gameplay loop is there. I have something like 15 different waves of enemies. Each wave ends with a boss. There is an upgrade scene. I already, I showed you how to do that. I covered that in another video. So, and I've done a few things like this now, a title screen. Like I said, there's an options menu on it. And a player select. There are now two different players you can choose as. You can play as this original guy that you saw, or you can play as him. If you want, I can do a tutorial showing how I did the player select, because it makes a difference, because you select the player, and then that player, whichever one you choose, has to consistently show up in the village where you're defending, as well as in the upgrades. And if the two players have different types of upgrades, then how do you manage that as well? Okay, so I think that should about do it. Let me know if you found this interesting, if you want to see more game dev videos, and please enjoy the rest of your day.